we want to turn now to Karl Rove, who obviously a lot of folks remember him for his work within the Bush 43 White House. But Karl, maybe a lot of folks don't know that you were actually part of the George H.W. Bush presidential campaigns, and the first one, which he ran unsuccessfully in 1980. It was hard fought. He didn't give up. He came back, but quite a momentous occasion.
Yes, it was. I'd actually gone to work for him when I was 22 years old, and he was chairman of the Republican National Committee in 1973 and 1974. And then he went off to China, and then came back to the CIA, and then began thinking in 1977 about running for president. And I went to work for him. I was 26 years old, and spent most of 1977 and 1978 traveling with him as he went around the country laying the foundation for his presidential campaign. About 18 most extraordinary months of my life.
I mean, we look at him when we talk about what a statesman, what a gentleman he was, even in defeat and certainly in victory as well. But he'd been through campaigns that were not successful before. How tough was that one?
Well, in a way it was tough, and in a way it wasn't. It was tough in that he lost the nomination, but Ronald Reagan wisely asked him to be his running mate in order to unite the party. And so defeat turned into partial victory. He and Reagan had a close relationship. And but, you know, the thing about George H.W. Bush that people need to remember is this is a man of enormous courage who was fearless. He entered the U.S. Navy at the age of 18 as a combat pilot, the youngest Navy combat pilot in World War II, shot down. When he went, after the war, he went to Yale, rushed through Yale in 3 years, started a family. But rather than joining his father at Harriman, Brown Brothers Harriman in New York, a prestigious financial firm, instead, he struck out for the oil patch, and for living first in Bakersfield, California, and then Odessa, and then Midland, Texas, learning the oil business from the ground up, selling tools, you know, learning the oil patch from the bottom up, because he wanted to start his own enterprise and started an oil company, independent oil company, named after a character he saw in a movie, Viva Zapata, and he named his Zapata Oil Company and made it in a way, you know, think about that. He left the comfort of the East in order to strike out for what in the early 50s was the rough frontier of the oil patch, because he wanted to build something of his own. And you know, when he ran for office in Texas, I mean, literally they hunted Republicans with dogs when he ran for the U.S. Senate. When he was elected to Congress, I think he was one of 2 Republican members of the Congress from Texas. And even then he demonstrated enormous courage. In 1966, I think it was, the Open Housing Act, very unpopular in the South. But the idea of every person, regardless of their race or their color or their background, having a right to get a home and to rent an apartment, regardless of where they came from and who they were, you know, he voted for it and went back home and faced the voters and explained why he had taken this very unpopular vote, because it was the right thing to do. And that was one of the great experiences of working for him over the years, was seeing what enormous character he had. He was a decent, humble man, but he had character. He was strong, and it really was a remarkable. He is a member of the greatest generation, and there's a reason that we call him that, not just because they saved the world, and they did, but also because they had the virtues and the values that really are timeless. And this was an extraordinary individual who served our country with such dignity and strength and conviction and effectiveness.
Yeah, and in so many different ways, Karl. I mean, you talk about his bravery in business and politics and the military and service. What do you think drove him? I mean, as somebody who spent all that time with him, crisscrossing the country, talking to people about why they should vote for him to become president, what was the driving force in all of those things that gave him such courage and made him such a risk taker?
Well, first of all, he loved America. He had a deep patriotism, not the patriotism that sometimes you see where people are shouting at the top of their lungs, but a recognition that this was a great country that had done so much for its people, and that so much more could be done. I mean, he believed in the American dream. He believed in the American experiment. He believed that America was a country that was a great country and capable of being even greater. And he felt an obligation to serve. It sounds old-fashioned. People used to talk about noblesse oblige, but he came from a family of wealth and privilege, and yet he was one of the most down-to-earth people, one of the most humble people. One of the things that I learned from him was that every person deserved respect. That we'd be someplace, and I remember once we went to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and when he was a young Navy aviator and he was training, one of his classmates had been a Pillsbury, and when the senior Mr. Pillsbury, who was running this giant company, this giant food and agriculture company, heard that this young pilot was going to be landing at the airport, who'd been his son's classmate, he went out and met him. And I remember President Bush talking to me about how moved he was that this man took such time out of his schedule to come and meet this young pilot and say hello to him and tell him, he appreciated his service to the country. And I thought that was, there's the humility of the man. And yet everybody he met, and I saw this every day that we were on the road, if you were the person who was serving him a cup of coffee at the cafe, or if you were the CEO of a major company who was talking about supporting him for president, he treated everybody with equal respect and dignity. And everybody in his eyes was a child of God. And it's rare in politics that you see somebody who can be so well grounded that doing all of the things that he did and remain such a decent and honorable and good person. And nobody came to the presidency with more experience. U.S. congressman, chairman of his party, ambassador to the United Nations, ambassador to China in the early days of our relationship there, director of the Central Intelligence Agency, vice president of the United States for 8 years. And yet he was the same person to his friends and associates, the people who'd known him for a long time, that they had known when he was making a break, trying to make a break in the oil patch, or moving to Houston and helping form the Republican Party there. I mean, there's a consistency to his life that is remarkable, because it represents the highest values to which we all ought to aspire.